soft voice, so I'm going to use this. This is a lovely place to return to. I love Bluffton. In fact, I was just here a couple days ago. Some of you were here with me. This whole book tour for Beach House Memories, which, here's the book. It's in hardcover still. It comes out in 3 formats, but this was an introspective journey for me because it's been 10 years in the making of a trilogy that I didn't know I was writing when I first began. It all began with this book, and that's what I'm going to be talking about tonight, the whole trilogy. Let's just say first, thank you for inviting me. And Dot, I just saw your face. Thank you for the invitation. That was lovely. You had this booked a long time ago. And I'm really delighted to be here with 2 people who I really love. Ken Berger, who, I'm a big fan of your work and always have been, but he's such a great fellow. And his wife, Bonnie, taught my son at Porter Gallup. Now, what are the odds? A wonderful English teacher. And my best friend and pal over there, Barb Bergberg. We're on the Island Turtle team together, which she's going to be talking about. And Barb is the photographer for the children's book. And we have a couple more children's books coming out. So let me just precede all that. And then Eileen Hutton and her husband, hi Bob, are the publishers of my audiobooks from Brilliance Audio. So a lot of people say, oh, you should have your book on audiobook. Well, they are on audiobook. And thank you for picking me up years ago, and I read my own book. All right, the Beach House is where I'm going to begin. When I moved here to the Isle of Palm, gosh, that was 13 years ago, and it's really hard for me to say that. 13 years, it was like yesterday. And we had been coming to the Isle of Palm for 10 years previously, but my husband's a child psychiatrist, and he has been angling for a position at MUSC. It doesn't just drop in your lap. So when they offered him to have a child over at MUSC, he said yes. And the first thing we did was come to Isle of Palm. And there's a very interesting story, kind of an emotional, poignant story, about me and my daughter Greta and our dog, which I won't talk about here, but Hub City Press is putting out a book November 27th, so coming right up, called Literary Dogs. And it's a lot of different Southern authors who are putting out stories about them and their dogs. So do look for it. It's coming out the 27th. And it's the story that I wrote is really quite an emotional story. And that was my baptism by fire when I moved here permanently. And I remember wanting to write a book about the island and the people set against loggerhead sea turtles. But I was living in Chicago, and then before that, Washington, D.C. I didn't know a lot about sea turtles. So I thought the first thing I would do was join the Island Turtle Team, which I did. I did not know all those years ago when I donned my Isle of Palm sea turtle hat and my T-shirt, became a member of the team, that this interest in sea turtles would become a lifelong passion that would utterly change not only my personal life, but it would change my entire career. It did. The Beach House is a seminal work for me as an author. I had written 5 or 6 novels by the time I arrived on Isle of Palm, so I wasn't a new author. But when I began working with the sea turtles, I changed how I approached novel writing. I've always been a conservationist. But when I moved here and became a member of the team and a resident of Isle of Palm, of South Carolina, of the stories that we write about him, I knew I'd come home. And I think that's true of so many people here. I talked to a number of you today, just as I walked in, who had just moved here. And people who have lived here all their lives. And the commonality in all of us is that South Carolina becomes our home. If you live here forever, you just assume it's always going to be here. This is what you've always known. If you come here from off, you realize how absolutely precious this landscape is. want very much to make sure that it's not ruined like so many of the landscapes that I've seen in some of the cities that I have lived in. And so the first thing I did when I became a member of the island turtle team was you're allotted a little spot of beach that you walk every morning. And you report your findings. What you're looking for are tracks. And yes, I did think they were the tire tracks, were turtle tracks the first time. It's a classic rookie mistake. And I was following Mary Pringle, who was our corps leader at the time. And I was never leaving. I mean, I followed her from morning till night. Finally, she said, "Mary Ellen, why don't you just get your license?" So I did. And I became a licensed member of the team. And the way it changed my writing is I've always written from archetypal themes. For example, possession of something, revenge for something. I developed a plot around these themes. What changed with the beach house was that I became intricately and intimately involved with mothers of sea turtles. Every aspect, from the moment the great mothers crawled ashore with that tank-like crawl, to laying, they dig with their rear flippers, to dig the nest from 24 inches down deep, dropping the leathery eggs into the nest, covering it up, crawling back to the sea, never to return to that nest. I was there when we sat at the nest at night, a bunch of women talking, and I write about groups of women all the time, sharing personal histories. And then watching the scrambling hatchlings comically, poignantly dig their way out of the nest and find their way to the sea. All aspects of this nesting saga. I was there while I was sitting on the beach, watching the little children come up with their eyes as big as saucers. "Mama, are they here yet? Are they coming yet? When are they coming? When are they coming?" And then I look up and there's Mama's eyes and Daddy's eyes and Grandma's eyes, every bit as big and full of wonder. And I realized that these questions were not idle questions. People really cared. That all the naysayers about people don't care about nature were not true. And I realized I'm a teacher from way back. And once a teacher, I know we're talking about teachers, once a teacher, always a teacher. And I thought, I could write a book about this species that I'm so enamored with, this beguiling loggerhead. And set a novel, instead of against archetypal themes, set the novel against some aspect of the nesting saga. For example, let's talk about the laying of the eggs when the mother goes back to the sea, never to return. This is her biological model. But for me, a novelist, I saw it as abandonment. I wanted to put it in human terms. So I took what I learned and all the facts, and I looked for the human parallel. And I wrote a novel about this mother and daughter and a reconciliation. So when you read The Beach House, I talk about nothing but turtles. Because if you know Mary Alice Monroe, you know she's going to talk about sea turtles. My girlfriend says, "Please stop about the turtles already." But the novel is about people. It's about the mother and the daughter and the women who are involved with the nesting saga. I wrote The Beach House and I knew it was special. It kind of gives a book to kids when you send it to their publisher. And the publisher saying to me, "No one wants to read about sea turtles." And I'm like, just wait. I knew it was different. And it was my first New York Times hit. And for an author, that's a big deal. And it was a big, big deal for me, not just because of the accolades of the New York Times, and you could always put that on your book, which is very cool. It is very cool. But for me, it meant I could continue writing books about nature and landscape, which is my true passion. So I wrote multiple books. Books about birds of prey. There's books about sweetgrass. There's books about butterflies. I mean, I just continue. I'm the, George Plimpton. I'm the George Plimpton of nature. That's how I describe myself. I thought I was done with featured. I was still a turtle lady today, but I had nothing left to say. But it was Bob Burgorg over there, who back in 2005, 6, something around there, said, Mary Alice, we're starting a sea turtle hospital at the aquarium. Come on, take a look. That sounds different. So I did. And in my, by now, typical modus operandi, I don't just do research, I do the work. That actually is my favorite part. I get to work with these characters. So I donned the clothes and I became one of the first, I wasn't really a full-time volunteer. I guess I'm kind of lucky. As an author, you get to do everything because they know you're going to be writing a book about it. But I began working with the rehabilitation of sea turtles at the aquarium during the early years. And when I wrote The Beach House, I identified with the character Kara, the heroine, the young woman who's in her 40s, who returned home and rediscovered this beautiful landscape. When I wrote Swimming Lessons, which I'm so impressed with Book Delicious, by the way, you found this book. It's still all, it came out in hardcover, trade paperback. This is all that's left is the mass market. But well done. It's hard to find. When I wrote Swimming Lessons, I identified with the secondary character, Toy, who was important in the Beach House, and it's her story in the sequel. And I wrote about something new that I learned about sea turtles, the rehabilitation of them. And the word that sprang to mind is resilience. I hope Barb's going to show you some photographs of that, but the turtles, when they come, Barb still is a volunteer at the hospital. When those turtles come in with either what we call turtle flu, some sort of disease, or they flashed by propellers, you know, you see that flash the tree, they're almost more dead than alive. They float in the ocean for weeks, maybe months. They should be dead. But they bring them into the Sea Turtle Hospital at the South Carolina Aquarium, and they work miracles there. And resilience was the key word for me when I wrote this novel. This is a story about a young mother, Toy, who asks herself the question, am I a good mother? Am I a good mother? I think that's the question we all ask, whether our child is 5, 25 like that, or 50. We still ask ourselves that question. And what is it, the strength that we need to be a mother, to be a father, to continue on, is resilience. I thought I was done. This book came out, it hit the Times, I was excited, I wrote a few other books. And then my daughter Greta, who was 27 at the time, we were working together for a fundraiser for a women's house, my sister's house, a shelter. And I think at 27, maybe 8 years after the book came out, I think Greta finally came around to read the book, The Beach House, for the first time. Mama, this is not so bad. I think she finally realized her mama was an author. And she said, Mom, I don't understand why Lovey just didn't leave her husband. And I thought, my, little girl. At 27, she had no idea what it was like to be a woman from a certain family house abroad in the 70s. You did not just get up and walk out of your marriage. I see some of you nodding your head. This was a scandal of epic proportions. My mother would have said, and did say to my sister, you made your bed, now lie in it. And I realized that I needed to tell a story to show my daughter where we've come from. Because in the South we like to say, where are you from? But it's not just place anymore. its era, its time. It's the stories you were writing about him. Thinking about it, I also realized that I was so fortunate to have interviewed some early sea turtle babies, the ones before DNR was on the beach. Just those women who took care of the nest because they wanted to. They had no one to report to. One of them was Florence Johnson from Evanston. And I had interviewed this woman before she passed. And I realized, this is Muddy. This is the character who was an older woman in this book, and something very important, a very vital love story happens in this story. It's issues of spousal abuse. And I'm sorry to say, in South Carolina, 10 years ago when I wrote this book, it was at number 1 or 2 in the nation. And it's still true. 10 years later, it's still true in issues of spousal abuse. So I knew that I needed to bring this subject up again. So I wrote the story. It's a prequel to The Beach House of Lovey going back 1970s about her love affair. This is a woman who had a love affair, who wanted a divorce, the scandal. What does a woman do when she's up against the wall and she could lose her children? And a woman could lose her children in the 70s if she got a divorce. This is a world that my daughter didn't know anything about. It was also a time when Wild Dunes wasn't on the Isle of Palm, when that whole northern end of the island was a maritime forest. It was wild. And I love that word, wild. Wild. You know, those of you who've been here for a long time know what this area was like back in the day. So I wanted to show how far we've come. South Carolina really should be proud of the culture of conservation that we've developed in this state. Oh gosh, I've only got a few minutes left. I identified in this book with the Beach House Memories with the character Lovey. It opens up with a woman of a certain age who looks back on her life, and it's poignant, very powerful. It was hard for me to write. I could not have written this book 10 years ago. I shared with my readers in this book, at the beginning of each chapter, little bits of facts about loggerheads. I swear, if you read this book, you will need everything you need to know about loggerheads in this book. But again, it's a novel. But in this book is about rehabilitation, sea turtles, resilience. But this one, I share with you all that the turtles taught me in the last 10 years. I've been a turtle lady, for 10, 13 years with Bard. And the lessons that you learn from these ancient mariners are profound. And I realized that it took me 10 years to be able to write this book. And it was a very emotional book for me. And people say, I thought it was done. I call it a trilogy, 10 years in the making. It sounds so profound, doesn't it? Actually, I didn't know I was writing a trilogy. It just was how my life came about. And it was a real journey. So this has been an introspective year in talking about this book, about all three, about talking about how far the world of sea turtles has come in the last 10 years. From the days when DNR wasn't even on the beach to the tight regulations that we experience today. It's been a journey, and it's one that I'm so happy to share with all of you. I'm still working with sea turtles. I'm sure there probably is another Beach House series. I think it's no longer a trilogy. I think we're going to have to refer to it as a series. But as long as I'm working with turtles, will always be another one. I'm working now on a book about dolphins. This is a determined trilogy because this is very complex. If any of you have seen The Code, which is a story about the Thai cheese slaughter in Japan. You should see it. It was an Oscar-winning documentary. But there's the question of dolphins in wild, dolphins in captivity, and then what do we do? So it's going to take 3 books. But I thank you all, for those of you who have come and followed me, who discovered me 10 years ago at the beach house, and have read my books ever since then. And for those of you who are just picking up my book and discovering it, I thank you all for the journey. And I really hope, my ambition, my goal as a writer, is to first of all tell a good story. That's my job. But also to inspire in each of you the desire to find out more about the animals that I'm writing about, so that you will fall in love with them as I do, as I share my passion with you, I share my dedication. And finally, please vote for local ordinances and zoning that can make a difference. Because every single person in this room doesn't have to be a turtle lady or rehabilitate hawks and eagles and falcons, but you all have a vote and you all have a say to protect this low country that we love so much. Thank you very much.